There are a lot of things that have played the scapegoat in behavior of children today, and as most of you know, games have been one of, if not the biggest scapegoats. For a lot of us old school and new school gamers, when we hear someone put the blame of a child or teenager doing something stupid on video games, we all normally end up thinking the exact same thing. What a crock of shit. Why is it that when kids nowadays do something stupid, more often than not, the blame seems to go to video games, and when it does, why do people actually believe that it's the video game's fault? Better yet, if video games really are as big of a problem in the development of a child's behavior, then why didn't they mess us up? What's so different about today's society where the blame of a child's behavior can actually be put on video games, while during our childhoods, if our parents actually put our negative behavior on video games, people would have thought they had lost their damn minds and they wouldn't have been taken serious? Well, first let's all assume that these people were right and that video games really did mess kids up. Calm down, I said assume. If they were right, then I believe the answer to this question is actually very simple. Fake versus real. Would you guys agree with me if I said the argument could probably be made that since video games are more realistic now, then that means they're also easier to mimic? I mean, how many of you as a kid after playing a game like Super Mario Bros. Would go outside and try to find a turtle so you can jump on it constantly until you believe you had enough lives? Were we really that smart, or did we simply have an advantage? It might be possible that the whole reason why we didn't mimic video games as kids wasn't so much because we knew better, but because in a way, we kinda couldn't. Games at that point weren't realistic and had no intention to be. They involved events that completely destroyed all logic, which means trying to mimic a video game in the past wasn't done so much through action as it was through imagination. But what if games were more realistic back then? If realistic shooters like Battlefield 3 existed during the NES generation, of course assuming the NES could actually pull it off, and kids brought guns to school and started shooting people due to that, would video games have been that easy of a scapegoat back then? Well, if I were to say yes to this, I would have to make one very incorrect assumption. I would have to assume that parenting back then was the same as it is now, and I'm sure we all know that's not true. How many of you knew that if you were to ever attempt to mimic something in a video game that ran the risk of you getting in trouble, your parents would beat the ever-living shit out of you? This probably played the biggest role in why we didn't mimic video games. But saying this completely destroys my original argument that games not being realistic played the main part in why we didn't mimic them, and that it was actually our parents. Then again, an even simpler answer to this is that it was more fun to play the game than it was to mimic it. Just kidding. Or am I? So what's the real answer? Was it because we couldn't mimic games as easily, or because we knew the outcome of said action and the logic we used was if the action gives off a punishment that surpasses a level we're willing to accept, like, I don't know, an ass whooping, then the action isn't worth it. And I think that might be what makes kids mimic games now. Well, not so much makes them, but why they do it without thinking about the outcome. Probably because in a way, there is no real outcome. At least not for them. The outcome actually goes straight to the parents and them only. Yeah, our parents would have gotten in trouble if we mimicked something from a video game that ended up hurting someone. But after that, the next person that was going to get hurt was us. It seems like our logic is still being used by kids, but there's something missing from the equation. If our logic was the action's not worth it if the punishment is too high, and kids now don't really get punished anymore, then the logic changes to every action is worth it. Since the kids aren't really getting in trouble, then the next person to blame is the parents. And this seems to be where the blaming of video games start. But why are they blaming video games? I have an assumption. I just hope I'm 100% wrong. In the past, if our parents had actually blamed video games for something stupid we did, no one would have taken them serious and they probably would have been locked in a damn mental institution. But as we can see now, parents can blame video games, and instead of them looking stupid, a lot of people end up getting angry at the video game companies. If a kid in our generation brought a gun to school and said they learned it from Contra, people would have been like, yeah, sure they did. However, if a kid now brings a gun to school and says they learned it from Call of Duty, then parents would say, oh, that damn evil Activision corrupting our children. My assumption is that the reason parents blame video games today is because people will actually accept that as a valid reason for a kid doing something stupid. Think about it. If you had a kid that did something that could not only get them but you as their legal guardian in a lot of trouble, but you knew you could easily get out of said trouble by shifting the blame to a video game knowing that people would actually believe you, would you do it? You'd have a lot of people pissed at you, but if you could easily shift the anger from you to the company that created said game that you pinned the blame on, and the people you told this to were stupid enough to believe it, why not? It's not like you care about the gaming industry. You only care about getting your ass out of the fire, and if it's really that easy, why not do it? It's like you got a freebie. And while a lot of these people are yelling and protesting at the video game developers, you're sitting at home thinking, wow, I can't believe that bullshit actually worked. I'm sure most of us did mimic what we saw on television or in games, but we also knew how far to take it. We knew there was a certain line you didn't cross, and kids today don't know that line because they aren't really taught that line. And since parents today can easily get out of a bad situation like their kid doing something that they know can get them both in trouble, and the action the kid mimicked can in some way represent an action from a specific video game, then the best action for the parent to take to get themselves out of trouble is to simply blame video games. Parents today seem to be giving the advice of sitting their kids down and talking with them. To me, the problem with that is the long talking tos that parents today are told to give their kids for us was nothing more than, holy shit, we got away with it. It was the ass whooping that made us say, yeah, fuck that, I ain't doing that bullshit again. We feared the punishment more than we did not mimicking the action, but sadly today that seems to be the exact opposite.